Echoes of Stillness. Chapter 1. The Ripple. Kazuki, a middle-aged calligrapher in Tokyo, had always lived a life of quiet precision. His days were measured in brushstrokes, his evenings in contemplation. But a single, seemingly trivial moment, a knock on the door from a stranger, began to unravel the stillness he so carefully preserved. The stranger introduced himself as Masato, an old acquaintance whose face Kazuki struggled to recall. Masato bore a peculiar message. Your silence holds an answer you haven't sought. Kazuki's world, rooted in routine and solitude, began to ripple. He hadn't spoken to his estranged family in years, nor to the neighbors who often greeted him. Masato's words stirred something in him, and that night the silence of his apartment felt louder than ever. Chapter 2. A whisper in the noise. Masato's visit left Kazuki restless. The next day, he ventured to a bustling marketplace, a place he had avoided for years. The cacophony of voices, the jostling of bodies, the vibrancy of life, it overwhelmed him. Yet, within the chaos, Kazuki noticed fleeting moments of quiet. A child holding their parent's hand, a bird perched on a wire above the clamor. He met Aya, a flower seller with a serene demeanor. She handed him a small bonsai tree and said, "Sometimes life speaks through what we don't hear." Intrigued, Kazuki purchased the tree and found himself returning to her stall each week, not for flowers, but for conversations that barely needed words. Chapter 3. The Weight of Words. Over tea with Aya, Kazuki opened up about his past for the first time in years. He spoke of his father's rigid expectations, his mother's quiet endurance, and his decision to leave behind their rural home. Aya listened intently, her presence a soothing balm. When Kazuki hesitated, she remarked, "Even silence is a kind of voice. What matters is what it carries." These words haunted Kazuki, and he began to reflect on the silences in his life. Not just his own, but those of his parents, his old friends, and even strangers in passing. Chapter 4. A Letter Left Unsent. One evening, Kazuki found an old unsent letter he had written to his father years ago. In it, he had poured his frustrations and grief, explaining his departure and his need for freedom. Yet reading it now, Kazuki felt only sadness. The letter was angry, but it lacked understanding. Inspired, he wrote a new letter, not to send, but to process his thoughts. This one was softer, acknowledging his father's struggles and his own. As he wrote, he felt a strange lightness, as though releasing a burden he didn't realize he carried. The harbor. Aya invited Kazuki to a quiet harbor at the edge of the city, where fishing boats swayed gently on the tide. The salty air carried a sense of renewal, and the rhythmic sound of waves soothed his restless mind. Aya asked him to watch the water carefully. "The surface seems calm," she said, "but underneath there's a world of movement and life. Silence is like that. It hides depth." Kazuki pondered her words. He realized his silence had been a shield, a way to protect himself from pain. But it had also become a prison, isolating him from others. That night, he began practicing a new form of calligraphy, blending traditional strokes with modern abstraction, a visual echo of stillness and movement. Chapter 6. The Echo of the Past. Masato returned unexpectedly, revealing more about their shared past. They had been classmates, and Masato recalled an incident where Kazuki had stood up for a bullied student. "You didn't say much back then either," Masato said, "but your actions were loud." This memory startled Kazuki. He had forgotten that moment, but it now seemed pivotal. His silence had not always been a withdrawal. Sometimes it had been a space for action, for understanding. Chapter 7. Conversations Unspoken. Kazuki started reconnecting with his estranged sister Mayumi through handwritten letters. Their exchanges were tentative but meaningful, filled with unspoken apologies and shared memories. Mayumi's responses were sparse but warm, hinting at a willingness to rebuild their bond. One day, she visited him, bringing along a photograph of their parents' home. It had aged, but the garden their mother tended was still vibrant. "They would have loved to see you like this," Mayumi said, admiring Kazuki's calligraphy, now displayed in galleries. Chapter 8. The Resonance. Kazuki's art began gaining recognition for its depth and emotion. Critics remarked on its unique blend of traditional and modern techniques, calling it a dialogue between the past and present, spoken in silence. Aya encouraged him to host a workshop. Initially hesitant, Kazuki agreed. Teaching others reminded him of the joy in sharing, not just techniques, but stories, experiences, and the spaces in between words. Chapter 9. The Voice Within. Kazuki finally visited his parents' old home, now abandoned. Sitting in the garden, he felt their presence, not as ghosts, but as memories etched in every stone and flower. He thanked them aloud, his voice steady, his heart unburdened. He planted the bonsai tree Aya had given him, a symbol of his journey. As he placed it in the soil, he whispered, "Silence doesn't mean absence. It means listening." Chapter 10. Echoes of Stillness. Years later, Kazuki's works adorned museums, but he remained humble, living in the same small apartment. Aya had become a close friend, and Mayumi visited often. His life was no longer defined by silence, but by its echoes. Acts of kindness, moments of reflection, and connections rekindled. In his final masterpiece, he wrote a single word in bold, flowing strokes: ko, voice. He added a quiet inscription: even silence has one. Meaning, Echoes of Stillness explores the beauty and complexity of silence. It shows how silence can be a shield or a space for growth, a barrier or a bridge. Through Kazuki's journey, the story reminds us that true understanding lies not in the absence of words, but in the resonance they leave behind.